This year has been a really hard year for all of us. We've already been stressed, very much highly self-critical. We're feeling down on our accomplishments already, and really feel like we've already done Yom Kippur for the past 6 months. It's under the pressure of close proximity, isolation. We've become so acute of our weaknesses, our flaws, our limitations, and what we've not been able to achieve. It's hard to come into Yom Kippur and to think about all the things that I have not done. I personally need a break. And I'm not looking to spend another day, especially an intense day of 25 hours, scrutinizing and beating myself up. That's definitely not the Yom Kippur that I'm looking for this year. And so in studying Yom Kippur, I tried to see if there's something that I could gain from Yom Kippur, because that definitely was not the experience that I thought would be helpful for myself this year. And so the more I dug in, the more I realized that Yom Kippur is actually meant to free us, to empower us, to lift us up, to allow us to progress forward out of hardship and transform our past into a better future. So yes, it's a day of fasting and restricting oneself from physical pleasure, but it's not and should not be a day of beating oneself up or self-affliction. And so now I'd like to note some of the earliest sources of what Yom Kippur was like in the Beit HaMikdash, which shows that actually it's not a day of sadness, a day of self-affliction, but rather it's a very happy day. And I want to look at the earliest sources that we have in rabbinic literature, such as the Mishnah and the Tosefta, and we're going to see that it's actually a day of joy, camaraderie, there's dating, and socializing. And so this image does not fit our current perception, and in this class, I want to give you a new paradigm that I think is going to be very helpful, especially for this year. So with that introduction, I'd like to dive in. Okay, first source. It's really famous. I'm sure many of you have heard this source before. There are two of the most happy days of Israel. In other words, our nation, the two happiest days are Purim and Hanukkah, right? That's what you would think. It's Purim and Hanukkah, the two happiest days. Maybe Pesach, the holiday of freedom. And what does the source say? Lo hayu yamim tovim liYisrael ke-hamisha asar be'av u'chiyom kippurim. One of the happiest days on the Jewish calendar. It's not Pesach, not Sukkot, not Shavuot, not Hanukkah, not Purim. It's Yom Kippur. And why? Because it was a day of dating. It happens to be, I believe, the grape harvest at the time. And the young single girls would go out dressed in borrowed clothing as to not embarrass anybody. Also, so that you're not distinguishing based on wealth. They're given the advice to look towards the family and who they are as human beings. And men, go out, see these young girls, and choose one who's good for you. And that's what they were doing during the temple period on Yom Kippur, going out and finding a mate. How would you would have expected? One of the happiest days. Next source. This one is from the Tosefta. The Tosefta reflects sources from the same time period as the Mishnah, although not included in the Mishnah. Here, this particular source is reflected in Rambam, in Maimonides, into modern-day halacha. So the source states, Haya holech le'agbil penei aviv. A person goes to visit his father. Wait, he's not in shul? What do you mean he goes to visit his father? Where is he? He's not in the temple? Penei rabbo, his teacher. I thought his teacher would be at the temple or in the synagogue. Right? Penei talmido is only in some of the text, so I'm skipping that for now. And Rambam specifically excludes that. A person who goes to visit their teacher can cross through a river up to their neck. On Yom Kippur, you're allowed to bathe, shower, wash hands, only if they're dirty or you're worried for coronavirus. But in general, you're not allowed to wash on Yom Kippur. It's completely forbidden. You're not allowed to immerse in water even your little pinky. And the Tosefta says, on Yom Kippur, what would they do? They would go and visit and pay respects to their family and to their teachers. And Rambam brings us down into halacha. One who goes to greet his teacher, his father, or one who is wiser than he, right? They're not all gathered together. And if they're not, because it's the break, you need to go out and visit them. It actually was growing up, and from an earlier time than mine, unfortunately, it's not known anymore to be the custom. But on the holidays, it was expected that the whole family got together and walked over to the grandma's house, the aunt's house, and visited all of the family. That was the culture on the holiday. And Yom Kippur, no different. Yom Kippur is a joyous day that you go and you pay respects to your family members, to your teachers. And so if they live really far away and you have to cross a river, even though you're not allowed to wash on Yom Kippur, it's so important of a mitzvah to go and pay respects to them that you could cross the river and get wet, even though you're not even allowed to get your pinky wet, unless it gets dirty or you're worried about coronavirus. Very much gives you a different idea of the day. The Beit Yosef, same author of Shulchan Aruch, he says something here very interesting. He's talking about the meal that we have before Yom Kippur. Before Yom Kippur, we have a very big meal. And why? And he says that it's because we want to give it honor and glory. Kedei leharot, I'm reading from here, shenoach umkubal alav, that we want Yom Kippur. It's pleasant, and we receive it well. V'usameach likrato, and you're happy to enter into Yom Kippur. Does this sound like the Yom Kippur we're mostly familiar with? Are you happy that Yom Kippur is coming? Most of us are shaking in trepidation. I'm going to look at all of my transgressions. It's a day I don't want to look in the face. But he says, since you can't eat on Yom Kippur, and you want to give the day respect, and you want to celebrate on the day, eat the day before. And that's the way that you honor the day, as you would on any other holiday where we have festive meals. So it's only because Yom Kippur, specifically a Yom HaSom, is the fast day, we don't eat. But it's still a holiday. And so we feast the day before. Sharet Teshuvah of Rabbeinu Yonah. Very, very famous book on repentance. And he writes, let's read the bold, but since the fast is on Yom Kippur, they were obligated to fix the meal over the joy, you were talking about Yom Kippur here, the joy of the commandment on the eve of Yom Kippur. But obviously it's not excessive joy. And so Harambam also notes that Yom Kippur is a day of joy, and many rabbis point this out in his halachot of Hanukkah, where he talks about Hallel, that we sing on many of our holidays, that we don't sing it on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, not because they're not happy days, but they're not days of excessive joy. So it's joy, but more tempered. But it's still not necessarily the same kind of trepidation that one would have expected. Many of us think about Yom Kippur as a day of affliction, and it's often called the day of affliction. Now, the Talmud asked the question, I think many of you may have asked, if it's a day of affliction, maybe I should go out and afflict myself. Additionally, I'll be doing Hidur mitzvah. I would be doing even a better mitzvah. Let me go out there and sit out in the hot sun, or sit out in the cold, or experience something that's a little bit uncomfortable. And then I'm really afflicting myself, and I'm going above and beyond, and I'm doing the right thing. The Gemara says no. So read it in English. The sages taught, the verse states, and this shall be a statute to you forever. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall afflict your souls. That's what the pasuk says. That's what the sentence says in the Torah. It's a biblical quote. It says, afflict your souls. So I would have thought that would mean, like I said before, go sit in the hot sun, go sit out in the cold, like many of us did in Rosh Hashanah, and shiver. Go do that again on Yom Kippur. It's going to be warm, by the way. It's going to be like 76 degrees. That's not the case. But so we would think that that is specifically the mitzvah, to go out and to suffer more. I might have thought that one should sit in the sun or in the cold to suffer and afflict his soul. Therefore, the continuation of the verse states, and you shall not do any labor, the homeborn or the stranger that lives among you. This teaches that just as it is prohibited to labor, just as prohibited labor is a mitzvah that requires one to sit and do nothing, as one is commanded to refrain from action. So it's not about affliction, that I need to afflict myself. It means just simply that I need to refrain from eating. And we're going to understand a little bit more about the why in a moment. But it's not about affliction of paining. It's about not focusing on eating and drinking right now. That's what the mitzvah. And think about it, what we spend most of our days running after. And our days are generally structured after meals. And now instead of it being structured after going after a meal, going after our physical pleasures, which are the 5 unit, including the ones the rabbis added, we pause from chasing after our physical pleasures for a moment, to shift our focus. So it's not about paining yourself. It's not about being a sad day or one overly of trepidation. There is joy, but tempered joy. The rabbis were very concerned that we don't anguish too much on Yom Kippur. And so we find numerous halachot on Yom Kippurim where they ensure that we're not pained too much. If you're not able to prepare your meal on Yom Kippur for post-Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur is going to end, and it could be another 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour. We would be starving, and it would be an additional affliction that we don't want. So they allow us to prepare our food on Yom Kippur for post-Yom Kippur. It is permitted to trim a vegetable on Yom Kippur for the afternoon prayer and from the afternoon prayer and on. And what is trimming? That he removes the rotten leaves, etc. But why? The whole key is why. Why are you allowed to prepare your meal? Really, shouldn't it say, I want you to focus on afflicting yourself? We've already said, no, that's definitely not the case. I want you to only be in shul, forget about the food. Oh, but I can't. I want to prepare. I can't sit in shul for another hour. I can't sit home for another hour preparing for my food. I want to just be relaxed, that my food's prepared for me. When the fast ends, I'll go home and I'll have my meal. And the rabbi said, okay, no problem. If you need to chop your vegetables, you need to prepare your food, no problem. We don't want you to have too much anguish and worry that there's going to be so much time after the fast until you actually get a meal. So Rabbi Chaim Navon writes, this is from an article from the Virtual Beit Midrash. And so he's quoting Rabbi Soloveitchik, who speaks about the term that Maimonides uses to say that one should refrain from eating and drinking and from the other restrictions. And it says, Shin Bet Dalit, like on Shabbat, to refrain. And so he says the following. This serves as yet another proof of the principle mentioned above. Affliction on Yom Kippur is not an expression of distress and suffering, but rather a law of resting, of temporary withdrawal from all worldly matters. The principle is similar to the idea that we saw regarding Shabbat. We are not dealing with disassociation from this world, but rather with a demand to withdraw temporarily from worldly matters for the sake of worshiping God. Shift your focus. If we stop going after food and after physical pleasures, which takes up much of our mental energy, we'll be able to focus on our higher level needs. It's an opportunity for us. It's the same opportunity that we have on Shabbat. Stop working. Why? Because I want you to recognize all of the things that you do have. All that you are working for. The family that you're working so hard to support, be home with them and have a meal. Spend time with them. Be with them. Enjoy them. And so too on Yom Kippur, reflect on where you are within your life, and we're going to see a little bit more about what a person's supposed to do. But shifting that focus, not about paining yourself. There are, however, two important differences. The withdrawal on Yom Kippur is more decisive and comprehensive, extending to food, drink, and other pleasures in comparison to Shabbat, where Shabbat emphasizes man's readiness to sacrifice in ways his normal activity. Yom Kippur focuses on a seeking intimacy with God that requires a temporary waiving of worldly life. In any event, neither Shabbat nor Yom Kippur represents the normal situation of the Jew. Both represent the unique and exceptional situations, the value of which stands out against the backdrop of our everyday life. It's the check-in, which allows us to reground ourselves, refocus ourselves on what it is that we're really working towards. As he says, about relationship with God, and as I'll expand, taking that relationship and transforming it into our everyday lives and propelling us throughout the year and look forward. And here's the source below that I just quoted. The language that Rambam uses is to abstain, but it's the same exact word as Shabbat, lishbot, Shabbat. So what is the theme of Yom Kippur? Now, what's really interesting is that it's specifically Yom Kippur when Yovel happens. Not sure if everybody here knows what Yovel is, so very quickly I'm just going to explain. Yovel is every 50 years when slaves are set free and land goes back to its original owners. Now, of course, the economy runs on that. And when you purchase a land, land is built into the price. But it saves individuals from perpetual poverty, because at some point they're given back their initial business, which was agriculture, so they could get back on their feet. The same with those who were in slavery, right? Which is not really slavery in the way that we think of it. It's another class, but the person became down and out, and they were, let's say, an indentured servant for a while. They had a contract, but the contract has to end at a certain point. And this is one of those hard deadlines where that ends and everybody goes free. That specifically happens on Yom Kippur. And as I opened up the class, Yom Kippur is not about affliction. It's not about just trepidation or about sadness or about fear, but it's rather about freedom. It's rather an uplifting day, a day that really should propel us forward and empower us. And so from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippurim, this is from Harambam, Mechot Shemitah V'Yovel. The slaves were to be freed on the occasion of the Jubilee year, which is Yovel. Neither left for their homes, nor were they still subjected to their masters, nor were the fields restored to their original owners. That's from Rosh Hashanah until Kippur. The slaves would eat and drink and rejoice as they were wearing wreaths on their heads, right? Because they're ready, just about to go free. Once Yom Kippur hits, they are going free. As soon as Yom Kippur arrived, now what do you think about it? This amount of celebration that you have. Imagine the celebration of all of these slaves going free, with the celebration that they had, and all those who were down and out who got their land back and get back on their feet and establish their business. And all these slaves, by the way, were given money. They were given not property, they were given sheep, let's say, which is essentially seed money to start their business. Here's a franchise. You've worked with me with sheep. Here's a flock of sheep. Go out. Imagine the joy to get back on your feet, the freedom. As soon as Yom Kippur arrived, the court sounded the shofar. Thereupon the slaves left to their homes, and the fields returned to their original owners. What an uplifting day of Yom Kippur, specifically on Yom Kippur this time. And it's not just the courts and the government that blow the shofar, it's every single person. I'm reading from the bowl. Every individual needs to blow the shofar, because we all have to recognize the freedom of the nature of this day, and calling out freedom throughout the land. That's what the Pasuk says to do. Call out, declare freedom throughout the land. Every one of us declare freedom throughout the land on Yom Kippurim every 50 years. And here's the original Pasuk. Ukratem deror ba'aret lechol yosheveha. You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all of its inhabitants. As I wrote in my notes, cry out, scream in the streets. This year is a year of freedom. Dude, this is Yom Kippur. Could you imagine this? On Yom Kippur, shofar, everybody's blowing shofars, everybody's celebrating. Slaves are going free. It's a new beginning, a new start for us and everybody. It'd be an awesome Yom Kippur. This is the kind of Yom Kippur that I want this year. And this is what I see when I look in the tefillah. The core of the tefillah is always called Kiddushat HaYom, right? And every holiday, the center beracha speaks about the uniqueness of the day. There are always 3 berachot in the beginning, which speak to praise of God. There are always 3 berachot at the end, which speak to thanks and gratitude to God. And then there's one in the middle, which changes depending on the holiday. So what is the theme as expressed in this beracha on Yom Kippur? And I took this, if I remember correctly, from Sefaria, from the Ashkenazi Mahzor. Okay. I'm going to also quote from a Sephardi one. I actually took from one printed 1567. I just happened to have it open, and I typed it in. So I don't know if it's the same Girsai of others, but that's what I had in front of me, and you'll see that source I'm excited to share with you. So, but here, this is the one from the Ashkenazi Mahzor. I'm going to read it now in the English. You chose us from among all the peoples. Now, is this in trepidation? Is this in fear? What's the tone of this? You loved us. Ahavta odanu. To read it in Hebrew, it's so poetic and beautiful. Verasita banu. And you wanted us. You desired us. That's the tone of the day. God loves us, and He wants to have a relationship with us. You exalted us above all of the other nations. and you dedicated us to you in a marriage with your commandments. How does the tone of the day feel now? Don't you feel like you're getting a warm hug? You drew us near our King. Your servitude and your great and holy name you have pronounced upon us. How special does that make us feel? I don't feel lowly, like I'm not good enough, like I have not achieved enough. The opposite. I feel raised up, loved, cared for, dedicated, given purpose and meaning to my life. And God, you gave us with love at Yom Kippurim hazeh. Yom Kippurim is not just a day of trepidation, fear. It's a day that God gave us with love, with ahava. We say this in Kedushat HaYom in your tefillah. For forgiveness, for pardon and atonement. He loves us. He understands what we've gone through. It's Avinu Shebashamayim, Avinu Av HaRahamim. Our Father wants the best for us. He sees so much potential in us. He wants us to see that potential. And so yes, we made mistakes. Yes, we may not have achieved as much as we had hoped to achieve. We may not have been perfectly on the right track. But that's okay. That's why I have Yom Kippurim. We're not going to perfectly wipe it clean because that's not reality. That's not what happened. All of our experiences exist with us always. But here's an opportunity to transform them, to move beyond them. Oh, there's another interesting point. I'm not going to discuss it, but I want to point to it and let you develop it. The beracha closes, Mikra Kodesh Zecher L'Siyat Mitzrayim. What in the world does the Exodus of Egypt have to do with Yom Kippurim? I think from the trajectory of this class, I think you got it. I think it is about freedom, and it is also national freedom. The holiday very much speaks about both the individual and the national. I think there's some other ideas here also, and I want you to think about that and explore that a little bit. And so this is just some notes below about what each one of the term means, but we'll continue. I was on a rabbinical call last night, and there was a rabbi in Florida, it's an Ashkenazi rabbi who has the opportunity of leading. He's a retired rabbi. He's leading an Ashkenaz service. He's an Ashkenaz rabbi who had led a large Ashkenazi Bet Knesset, which has a very small Sephardic contingency. And as a retired rabbi, he became the rabbi of the Sephardic contingency, and he's loving it and having a blast. And he said, I love looking at their tefillah. And he said, I noted the close of Ne'ilah, the last prayer that the Syrians say on Yom Kippur. And he said, it's just so beautiful. And so I want to share this with you also. I didn't even myself recognize this till he pointed it out. It closes with a line from Tehillim, which says, let me hear what God the Lord will speak. He will promise well-being to his people, his faithful ones. May they not turn to folly. So we close with saying what? God loves us, right? He promises shalom el amo, peace to his nation. Whatever happened on Yom Kippurim, I'm promising, and this is what David HaMelech says, shalom el amo. I'm leaving the day feeling shalom, feeling at peace with myself, with my Creator. Because now, having gone through the Yom Kippur experience, I now am one of the faithful ones. I fasted, just like I was commanded to, and I decided that I wanted to be focused and dedicated towards God. A beautiful close. Not one of fear, trepidation, but I don't know how everybody else here experiences the end of Yom Kippur. I usually don't run to eat. I don't feel the need to do so. I usually feel really inspired, almost like on a spiritual high, and I feel like I could do another 3 more fasts. I really feel this feeling of shalom. I feel at peace with myself and with the world and grounded. And I really think this pasuk really captures that. Ishma mai daber ha'el Adonai. So let me hear, what's God going to say? He will promise well-being to us. That's how we end. Now, what is the key mitzvah of Yom Kippur? Besides fasting, what's the one major mitzvah of the day? It's a vidui. Now, Harambam describes vidui as saying, Ashavnu bagadnu, right? God, I transgressed before you. But that's not the only way of doing vidui. Vidui comes up in numerous cases. And I want to just bring one of them to you. Vidui literally is an articulation, a proclamation, a declaration. And it could also be recognizing the positive. And that's really where I want to go with this. Because I think this year it's really hard to beat ourselves up. I cannot myself, and I don't know about you, walk into Yom Kippur and saying, these are all the things I didn't accomplish this year. This is all the Torah that I didn't learn. These are all the mitzvot that I didn't do well enough. This is not the year for that. I think we just spent 6 months really hurting and doing our best. And so I want to look at the positive viduis. And this is one that we say, it's called Vidue Masser. After we do a positive mitzvah of separating tithes, we state the following. These are Pesukim from Sefer Devarim. You shall declare before the Lord your God, I have cleared out the consecrated portion from the house, and I have given it to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Just as you commanded me, I have neither transgressed nor neglected any of your commandments. This is a vidui, but a positive vidui. You're not stating here, in vidui ma'aser, all the mitzvot asel, the positive mitzvot that you didn't do, and all the negative ones that you transgressed. But rather, you're making a vidui, God, I did what you asked me to do. Here's what I did do. I did separate the ma'aser. And I gave some to the Levim. I gave some to the Gir. I gave some to the Atom and the Almanah, just as you instructed. I have not eaten of it while in mourning. I have not cleared it out, any of it while I was unclean, and I have not deposited any of it with the dead. I have obeyed the Lord my God. I have done just as you commanded. I think sometimes it's very powerful for us to focus on what it is that we have done. There's a concept that being good enough actually propels you forward. It doesn't hold you back. What I believe actually holds you back is when you feel down, insignificant, not good enough, not capable. That's what really holds us back, because that puts us into a sad, melancholy, and maybe depressed state. Sometimes, sounds counterintuitive, but sometimes when you feel good enough, you acknowledge what it is that I did do, you empower yourself, you propel yourself to want to do even more. And so I make this declaration, I did the Maaser just as you said, I am a good Jew. Look at what I did, and now I could go and do more. Now I want to bring you some more sources in line with this. So I'm quoting Tanat de Beliyahu Rabbah. I think I originally saw this in a Siddur. I don't remember the source exactly from there, but I got the primary source. So here it's really interesting, because in here you're saying to God, was you're telling God, remember how many Jews, how many Jews who don't have, and now think about this year, right? How many Jews don't have sustenance and financial income? And anyways, how dedicated they are. Right? God, don't be so hard on us as a nation. How many of us do have dedication to you, even when we're lacking? Look at the positive. This is not a prayer that was contained, I think it was a Ben Ish Chai Siddur. It's not focused on what we're not doing. The Siddur, according to Tanat de Beliyahu, was focusing on what we are doing as a nation. Right? It's being milamed zechut. Speaking about the merits that we have. How many those who are lacking funds amongst us, who here it says the non-Jews, right, are making their life difficult, but yet they're still dedicated to you, even with all that. We have merit, God. Don't be so hard on us. How many people don't have money for food, but still, they're still dedicated to you, God, and they still teach their kids Torah. And it goes on and on and on. God, we have a lot of merits. Yes, there are things that we haven't done, and we're not perfect. But there's so much good that as a nation we have done. Again, Yom Kippur is both national and individual. Let's continue. It's an unbelievable Gemara. An unbelievable Gemara. Okay, you ready for this, guys? Brace yourselves. This one is good. In the future, they will surely come that will surely come. The Holy One, blessed be He, will say to Abraham, right? So God's going to say to Abraham the following: your children have sinned against me. So what's Abraham going to respond? God comes to him and said, your children, right? It says your children. In this Gemara, God doesn't take responsibility for them. He shifts it to Abraham. Your children, they've sinned. They've sinned against me. So what does Abraham say? Wipe them out. They deserve it. That's pretty wild, right? Abraham, Avinu, what are you talking about? This is what the Gemara says, right? God says, Abraham, what do I do about my children who have transgressed against me? Abraham says, wipe them out. It's okay. Go to Yaakov. Yaakov says, since he experienced the pain, since Yaakov experienced the pain of raising children, perhaps he will ask for mercy on their behalf. God was trying to seek out which of the avot will actually plead on our behalf, right? God doesn't want to punish us. He wants one of them to stand up for us. Abraham doesn't. Yaakov doesn't. Neither Abraham nor Yaakov knew how to respond properly, right? Because God wanted somebody to stand up in defense. So he says to Yitzhak. Now, in Yitzhak's life, was he somebody who generally stood up for things? Do we see him taking big action in his life? Not at all. He is extremely passive. And I think the Gemara, specifically because of that, notes this, where he goes toe to toe with God and stands up on behalf of the Jewish people. Your children have sinned against me, God tells him. And so what does he say? Master of the universe, are they my children and not your children? How dare you say they're just mine and not take any responsibility for them? They're your children as well. At Sinai, when they accorded precedence to, we will do, or we will listen before you, didn't you call them my son, my firstborn, son of Israel? Now that they have sinned, are they my children and not yours? And he continues, and I guess it got chopped off on my source sheet, but he continues, the Gemara continues, and he says, and he goes through the day that we have, how much of our time we spend sleeping and doing other things during our day. So, okay, so if I only have 12, you're saying they sinned for X amount of years, but if they slept for 7 hours a day, right, and they went to the restroom and they ate and they did all of these other things, how many hours left are there of the day that they actually could have transgressed? So they transgress for 5 or 6 hours a day. God, no worries. If you can't handle that they sin for just that amount of time, for a third of their life that they transgressed, and you're not going to look at the 2/3 of their life that they did well, I'll take it. Put it on me. Yitzhak stands up to God and tells him, they're your children. Why are you only focusing on the 1/3 of their life that they transgressed? What about the 2/3 that they did not transgress? And God, really, if you can't handle that, I'll take it. I'll stand up to that. I want to look at this Yom Kippur a little bit differently than I do for a normal Yom Kippur. On a normal Yom Kippur, we focus very much on all of the things that we don't do. We focus on all the things that we did wrong. But that's not the only theme of Yom Kippur. A major theme of Yom Kippur is one of remembering that God loves us, that God allows us the opportunity to start again. And really, for all of the transgressions, which are the light transgressions, those just kind of get erased. And he wants us to get back on the right track with him. He gave this to us with love. And Vidue, although Harambam says, Ashavnu Bagadnu, this year I'm going to choose a different Vidue. And I'm going to focus on specifically what are the things that I got right this year. What went well? What did I accomplish? I'm not going to focus on the small amount that was not done. I'm going to stand up for what it is that I did do. And I'm going to recognize that Avinu Sheba Shamayim, God in heaven, my Father in heaven, loves me and appreciates all that I have done and understands that will propel me forward. It will be the freedom taking me from the chains that may have bound me from focusing on all the negative, all that we have not done, which so often holds us back because we feel insignificant, incapable, unworthy. But rather to blow the shofar of freedom and celebration and empowerment, giving us back our land and our property, giving us the opportunity to start again, a new beginning and a new future. one where we end, like I mentioned, in the Syrian tradition, with shalom, where we become grounded again, wholesome, feeling at peace with ourselves and the world. That's the Yom Kippurim that I'm looking forward to, and I'd like to give the opportunity to all of you to experience as well. Shana Tova.